Have you ever pondered why your depth unsettles others? Why the more you contemplate, the less you fit in? Why your quietness, your inquiries, your refusal to conform to superficial norms make others, particularly women, retreat, criticize, or misinterpret you? Soren Kierkegaard once noted, people demand freedom of speech as compensation for the freedom of thought they rarely use, but you think. And that is the crux of the issue. You are not dangerous because you are hostile. You are dangerous because you refuse to be predictable. And in a world where predictability is mistaken for safety, the thoughtful man becomes a threat merely by existing. Modern relationships are founded on comfort, not truth. But the thoughtful man, he is averse to illusions. He strips away facades. He questions why love feels transactional. He notices the act in people's eyes, the disconnect between words and feelings. And Kierkegaard cautioned us, the crowd is untruth. When a man refuses to be consumed by the crowd, when he chooses his own path of meaning, solitude, and reflection, he shatters the entire framework that society relies on to keep people passive and emotionally compliant. Women don't fear thoughtful men because they're smart. They fear thoughtful men because they cannot control them, because the thoughtful man doesn't rely on flattery to be desired. He doesn't need validation to feel masculine. He doesn't play the puppet just to be chosen. He doesn't chase because he sees that most pursuits are rooted in illusion, not love. And when he does love, he loves with terrifying clarity, not for comfort, but for revelation. That kind of presence, sharp, discerning, existentially honest, is rare. And what is rare is often rejected before it is respected. Kierkegaard wrote extensively about the concept of despair, but not as most people understand it. He called it the sickness unto death, a man being unaware that he is estranged from his true self. And that is what modern culture fears most in men, that they might wake up from the performance, that they might stop being charming and start being conscious, because a conscious man cannot be seduced by applause or emotional chaos. A conscious man is no longer driven by the need to be liked. And when a man stops needing to be liked, he becomes free. And when a man becomes free, he becomes dangerous. Ask yourself, why do you feel misunderstood in every room you enter? Why do you sense people are uneasy around your silence? It is because most people, especially in this attention-driven world, derive their identity from being seen. But the thoughtful man, he derives his identity from seeing. And seeing deeply makes others uncomfortable, especially when they are trying to hide. Kierkegaard said life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. And thoughtful men live forward, but they are always watching, dissecting, understanding the structure of everything: power, emotion, seduction, fear. So what happens? When a man is no longer seduced by the surface, when he stops being enchanted by the games, he becomes unplayable, not because he's cold, but because he's whole. And that wholeness threatens the economy of modern dating, where confusion is currency and emotional unpredictability is mistaken for passion. Kierkegaard knew this. He walked away from the only woman he ever loved, not because he didn't care, but because he did. Because he knew that to live authentically meant to reject the role society assigns, even if it cost him everything. Men, listen closely. The more thoughtful you become, the more isolated you may feel. That is not failure. It is the price of awakening. You scare people not because you are unkind, but because you are unconditioned. And a man who cannot be conditioned cannot be controlled. And that is the greatest threat to any system built on manipulation, including romantic ones. Most people are not looking for love. They are looking for usefulness. They want you to serve a role: provider, performer, protector, puppet. But the thoughtful man steps outside of those frames. And when he does, he becomes invisible to the ones still inside them. Kierkegaard called this the leap of faith. To leave the security of roles, systems, and superficial expectations and walk alone, to love truth more than comfort, to choose despair if despair is honest over bliss that is fake. And that leap will cost you, it will strip you, but it will also awaken you, because once you truly see, you can never unsee. And your intelligence, if rooted in self-awareness and not just information, will turn you from a man who seeks validation into a man who seeks God or meaning or peace. And that is terrifying to others and sometimes even to yourself, because what comes next is not for the faint-hearted. Karga once said, to dare is to lose one's footing momentarily. Not to dare is to lose oneself. And most men have already lost themselves, not because they lack intelligence, but because they've been trained to apologize for it. You were told to soften your words, to dim your insights, to pretend you don't see what's missing, smile when something's fake, laugh when something's shallow, stay silent when something's wrong. You were taught to be agreeable in order to be accepted. But acceptance that demands the death of your essence is not acceptance, it's assimilation. And the thoughtful man who refuses to assimilate becomes a threat, not just to women, but to everyone who profits from his silence. You scare them not because you are aggressive, but because you are precise. Because when you speak, your words carry weight. Because when you look at someone, they feel seen, not flattered seen. And being seen is unbearable for those still wearing masks. Most people don't want connection. They want comfort. They want reinforcement of their illusions. But the thoughtful man dismantles illusion wherever he goes, even in love, especially in love, because love for him is not a game. It's not a power play. It's not a role play of unmet childhood wounds. For the thoughtful man, love is truth. And truth doesn't always feel good. It feels real. That's why you feel resistance. That's why you're met with confusion, even hostility. Because your presence threatens the system that rewards performance. You don't beg, you don't chase, you don't explain yourself 10 times just to be understood. You walk away not because you're angry, but because your soul refuses to be auctioned off to the highest bidder of convenience. And that kind of man, calm, grounded, inwardly sovereign, is more terrifying than any tyrant because he is not reacting. He is choosing. And choosing authentically, consciously, is the greatest rebellion left in this world. You want to know why thoughtful men scare modern women? It's not because women are shallow. It's not because they're malicious. It's because we live in a world where most people have been conditioned to expect performance, not presence. And the thoughtful man cannot fake presence. He brings himself fully or not at all. And most are not ready for that kind of fullness. It's too raw, too unfiltered, too demanding of self-awareness. And most people, men and women alike, would rather stay comfortably asleep than wake up to their own contradictions. Kierkegaard's life was a testament to this paradox. He loved Regina Olsen, but he left her, not because he didn't feel, but because he felt too much. He knew his path was solitary, that his inner world was too wide, too turbulent to anchor to anyone else. That's the paradox of the thoughtful man. He longs for intimacy, but not at the cost of his integrity. He desires connection, but refuses to perform for it. He is willing to walk alone rather than dilute his essence just to be desired. That's not arrogance, that's alignment. And it terrifies people because deep down everyone wants to be chosen, but the thoughtful man, he wants to be met. And being met requires the other to also be whole, to have gone through their own fires to have unlearned their own lies, and most aren't ready for that, so they call you distant, difficult, cold, but the truth is, you're not cold, you're clear, you don't hate women. You just don't worship illusions, you don't hate love, you just refuse to call dependency love. You've seen too much to play blind, and that's what scares them. You're not manipulable, you're not predictable, you're not waiting to be told who. To be Kierkegaard said, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. But you, if you're listening this far, you are different. You want to know who you are beyond the noise, beyond the roles, beyond the craving for approval. And that journey will cost you popularity, it will cost you comfort, it may even cost you love. But what you gain in return is far more powerful. Selfhood, sovereignty, sanity. You will stop searching for someone to complete you because you will no longer feel incomplete. And that, brother, is when you become truly dangerous, not to others, but to the system that thrives on broken men. Because the deeper we go, the more everything starts to unravel, especially the lies you've been told about what it means to be a man in the eyes of the world. Kierkegaard was not interested in success as society defines it. He wrote, "The greatest hazard of all, losing oneself, can occur very quietly in the world, as if it were nothing at all." And that is precisely what's happened to so many men. Quiet disappearance, not physical, not loud, but spiritual. Men have lost themselves trying to be palatable, trying to be charming, trying to be whatever the room wanted, until one day they look in the mirror and see a stranger. But the thoughtful man, he cannot pretend for long. The tension builds inside him. He starts to notice that what others call confidence is often arrogance, that what they call love is often dependency, that what they call chemistry is often trauma. Speaking its native tongue, he starts to see, and once you see, you suffer. That's the price of awareness. You suffer because you no longer fit. You suffer because your questions ruin parties, because your clarity offends comfort, because your need for truth repels those addicted to performance. And this is where the Kierkegaardian paradox sets in. You either betray yourself to be accepted by the world, or you betray the world to remain true to yourself. Most men take the first path. It's easier. It's praised. But it's a slow death. The thoughtful man, if he is brave, chooses the second, and in that choice he begins to live, not comfortably, not safely, but honestly. And this honesty manifests in everything: how he speaks, how he dates, how he works, how he worships, how he walks away. And the world punishes that kind of man. Because a man who cannot be seduced by the crowd becomes a mirror to everyone still trapped in it. Let's talk about relationships. Why does a woman feel uneasy around the thoughtful man? Not because he doesn't care, but because he cares differently. He doesn't chase, he observes, he doesn't flatter, he listens. He doesn't respond to every emotional cue like a trained dog. He chooses his reactions with surgical precision. This makes him mysterious. And mystery terrifies people who need constant emotional reinforcement. The thoughtful man is not absent, he's selectively present. And this selectivity feels like rejection to those used to being worshipped without effort. But he doesn't worship, he discerns, because intelligence, when combined with emotional clarity, becomes spiritual X-ray vision. You see through smiles, through games, through flattery, and that kind of sight unnerves anyone still hiding. Kierkegaard spoke often about the individual's responsibility to become a self, not a social role, not a performer, not a mirror of other people's expectations, but a self. And becoming a self requires silence, stillness, reflection, solitude. 4 things modern culture is allergic to: Because a man who sits in silence too long might stop consuming, might stop conforming, might stop apologizing for who he is. And most terrifyingly, he might stop chasing what was never worthy of him in the first place. You want to terrify people? Walk into a room and don't seek attention. Just observe. Don't over-explain. Speak with precision. Set boundaries without raising your voice. Be kind without being compliant. Be romantic without being dependent. Watch what happens. Watch how people begin to adjust themselves in your presence. Because deep down, everyone senses when a man is rooted, and most don't know what to do with him, especially when he's not performing. That's the secret of thoughtful men. They don't perform, and that's what makes them dangerous. Kierkegaard wrote, "Once you label me, you negate me." The thoughtful man cannot be labeled. Is he cold? No, he's composed. Is he arrogant? No, he's self-respecting. Is he aloof? No, he's discerning. But labels are easier than reflection, so the world will reduce him to anything that makes his clarity feel less threatening. But don't let that shake you. Let it sharpen you. Let it deepen your solitude. Let it fortify your path. You were not built to be palatable. You were not made to beg. You were not designed to be everyone's comfort zone. You were made to become a man in the Kierkegaardian sense, aware, faithful to truth, willing to walk alone into the storm. If that's what it takes to keep your soul intact, then let's walk further into the storm. Kierkegaard warned us. The crowd is untruth, and yet most men still look to the crowd for validation. They measure their worth by how many hearts they can win, how many smiles they can spark, how many people clap when they speak. But that applause is a trap because it teaches you to shape yourself according to what pleases others, not according to what is real within you. And here's the truth you weren't told. The more thoughtful you become, the less applause you will receive. Because you are no longer playing for the crowd, you are playing for your soul. And most people don't clap for that. They stare, they question, they shrink. You scare people not because you are cruel, but because you are clear. In a culture built on noise, your silence is disturbing. In a world built on stimulation, your stillness is unsettling. In an age of constant availability, your refusal to be emotionally summoned on command feels like rebellion. And it is. It's the rebellion of a man who has reclaimed his mind, his heart, and his attention.